In a time marked by growing disenchantment with institutions and a worrying return to the language of force, it is surprising, and perhaps comforting, the clarity with which Pope Leo XIV has taken a stand against the logic of rearmament, unmasking without hesitation its uselessness and, even more, its moral unhealthiness. Already in the very first days of his pontificate, it became clear that he would not choose the path of half measures, nor the refuge of diplomatic language aimed at not disturbing the balance. With lucidity and courage, he instead decided to name outright what he considers a drift: the systematic investment in armaments as a response to conflicts and international tensions. In addressing the representatives of the Eastern churches, just a few weeks after the beginning of his ministry, he forcefully raised a question that carries the weight of an accusation. How can, in the heart of the 21st century, the deep desires for peace of peoples continue to be betrayed with the false propaganda of rearmament, thus fueling the illusion that military supremacy can guarantee security and stability? It is a denunciation that does not stop at the surface of the problem, but delves into the pervasive mechanism of political and media communication, unmasking the narratives artfully constructed to make acceptable what is, in its essence, a failure of humanity. In his words, it is not a simple exhortation to moderation. What emerges is rather a severe judgment on the entire ideological framework underlying the arms race. The Pope does not merely ask for prudence. He openly declares that the path of peace is not only possible, but the only reasonable way, while rearmament represents a short-sighted choice, incapable of producing anything but new fractures and new sufferings. And he does so by appealing not only to moral reasons, but also to deeply concrete considerations. The funds used to produce instruments of death, he said, could and should be allocated to building hospitals, schools, and vital infrastructure for the well-being of peoples. Instead, while entire neighborhoods are razed to the ground and the most vulnerable pay the highest price, the profits of the arms industries grow amid general indifference. Leo XIV also insists on a point striking for its relevance. People today are no longer unaware. Public awareness has grown, and it is increasingly difficult to hide the paradox of societies that proclaim themselves civilized and democratic while fueling a global system that finds in arms production one of its main pillars. Faced with all this, the Pope does not limit himself to an ethical appeal, but calls for a cultural and spiritual awakening. Getting used to war, he said, is the first step toward losing one's humanity. And when he warns against the allure of powerful and sophisticated armaments, he touches on an uncomfortable truth, namely that rearmament is not only a military strategy, but also a symbolic seduction, an apparently reassuring shortcut that distracts consciences from the efforts of confrontation, diplomacy, and compromise. During a public audience in St. Peter's Square, recalling yet another attack that struck defenseless civilians, he chose to quote the prophet Isaiah, "Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, nor shall they learn war anymore." And to those ancient words, he added an exhortation that sounds like a manifesto of this pontificate: to reject every logic of bullying and revenge and to choose, with awareness and determination, the path of peace. It is within this framework that the Pope's insistence on a word rarely heard in today's political lexicon is understood: disarmament. A concept many consider naive or outdated, but which for Leo XIV represents not only a hope, but a rational urgency, a historical necessity. Even when addressing the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See, he did not soften the force of his message. Quoting the words of his predecessor, he firmly stated that no peace is possible without true disarmament, and that the legitimate need of every people to provide for their own defense cannot and must not turn into a generalized arms race, because doing so ends up suffocating precisely the peace one declares to want to protect. Everything, in the way Leo XIV speaks of war and peace, betrays the conviction that the alternative is not between idealism and realism, but between responsibility and complicity. His words do not seek easy consensus, nor do they adapt to the conveniences of the moment. On the contrary, they forcefully pose an uncomfortable question. What kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us? A world where new weapons are built as quickly as the fabric of civil coexistence unravels? Or a world where, finally, there is the courage to disarm arsenals and invest in human relationships? For Pope Leo XIV, the answer is clear and admits no ambiguity. War is always a defeat, and rearmament is not a solution, but the most evident symptom of a civilization that has lost its way. And so his voice today compels us to ask a question that concerns us all. Do we really want to continue investing in war when we could invest in life? Thank you for listening to us. If these words have moved you, share them. Because, as the Pope said, nothing is lost with peace. Everything can be lost with war.